or at the dumpster level. So we're not even talking about competing with that many commercial enterprises that could get by with weekly cart level pickup. But there's some competition there. But it seems that if we were to do that, then the licensing fee would, well, I guess they would need to be considered in relation to each other. So we can move on, but is that, so the four action items on that are just, do market research on the possibility of the city charging a separate commercial fee, expand the recycling collection, accommodations for the housing authority, and one thing on the licensing fee. Thanks, guys.
Y'all concur with this?
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, guys.
I think we're okay.
Yeah, thank you.
I got some.
Probably stay close.
Okay.
Next discussion item is landlord tenant issues.
New businesses now.
I'm sorry.
New businesses now.
Well, I'm sorry, yes, new business, I'm sorry.
It's a new business. Commissioner Wilder.
Some folks have approached me, and I think perhaps others as well, about the possibility of the city adopting a bullying ordinance similar to the one that the state recently failed to adopt. And we don't need to get into this today, but so when I could submit a copy of the state law that didn't pass the staff, just a copy and distribute to us so we can actually discuss it at a future work session if there's interest in looking into this.
Yeah.
I'll just pass this down. I actually got a copy sent on this. I'll pass it down the way. But if that's just something that you guys make sure copies on it, if Rob could take a look at it and kind of give us his feedback.
You want to see if other cities have passed this as well? Certainly that's what we.
Always good to know.
The chief and I did not invent or cloth the fireworks ordinance. We copied and pasted it. People even sent us their versions in Word so we could pull it out. So we'll do the same thing.
I have one more.
Yes, Commissioner.
Jeff, do you know if crosswalks are state responsibility or does the city have any say? So if you're going over Capitol Avenue, with the Senior Bridge being down, it's hard to really think that ADA compliance, either you have to go up the hill and around East Main, but still there's no crosswalks to get onto the Capitol Avenue Bridge. There's no ramps, nor is there a crosswalk, and the pedestrian bridge is down. So you're just kind of stuck unless you want to go way out Home Street and kind of loop around Wilkinson Boulevard and take Taylor Avenue into the other side of the river. So if you want to get across the river,
you do?
There's no ramp. There's not a safe way besides getting on the street.
Contractor had addressed that in their pre-construction meeting, and the way they put in their plan that they would address ADA crossings since they had the Senior Bridge actually closed to pedestrians and vehicles while it was being painted, was to call Frankfort Transit and schedule a ride. That's during working hours, during Monday through Friday. After hours or on weekends, they would call the contractor and he would get a taxi for them. So it'd almost be like a scheduled ride situation. And that's what they put in their plan to address ADA.
How would people be aware of that?
It should be posted on the bridge.
Is there any way to think about putting ramps on, so if you're going down Capitol Avenue, so the Capitol's behind you, that with the light at East Main, the cars are stopped on the hill, that we could put ramps and a crosswalk to the other side, because the other side also doesn't have the ramps. So that you can get to the other side, at least, even if you have to take a couple of turns, at least you can get across without taking it You might have to walk your children in the middle of the street with a stroller.
I think that to pursue something like that, you'd have to get some type of letter from, there's an ADA coordinator in Frankfort, and because I don't think you can meet the ADA side slopes on the bridge, and so you'd almost have to go into the to the request to the state and get an exemption on the front end. So because I don't believe you're going to meet the ADA requirements, and that's kind of why it's not been done today. So maybe a step in this direction would be to get a letter from ADA, and there's a person here that works for the state, it's the state coordinator, that he could write a letter kind of exempting the crosswalk from meeting code, that which would allow maybe the construction to actually be feasible. So I guess the state would be the person who would send a letter to the request the transportation gap. Because that's their highway and their bridge. But that'd be a good first step, is to get, well, we've been told that it's so tall.
So tall.
To get the slopes down to meet the 12% is difficult. So maybe getting that exception on the front end would
So
be.
is it one?
But what they have now is with the Singy Bridge, when that's open, that means ADA.
Right.
But not right now.
Right.
So they have to use Frankfort Transit or a taxi. That's how they put in their plan, in the state.
Thank you, Jim.
Any more new business?
Thank you, ma'am.
Seeing none, okay, Mr. Bowman.
The next discussion item is the pay-as-you-throw and landlord-tenant issues. So I guess we'll have the same. And any staff who feel you will not be on the future agenda may leave.
You want to bring the people?
Yes, if you all would come back. I guess a good place to start is Mr. Hackmark prepared a report. You want to start with that? Written report?
Thank you.
This is just a quick update of the program. We're 3 months into the program, a little over 3 months. We started, I guess, effective date of the ordinance was February 1st. We service about 10,000 customers every week. And what I was attempting to do in this memo is kind of look at last year's program when it was a flat fee versus this year, for the first 3 months of this year, and under the pay-as-you-throw. And last year, under the flat fee, we had a lot of violations last year, but there was no fee attached to it. And what David Sands would normally do when a violation would occur, he would go and talk to the owner of the property and communicate back and forth and would work it out in the field. And so there's really no 100% compliance, just communicating, and that generally worked. This year, what we found is there's actually some good news, is we've only issued 50, kind of like we use kind of the high grass ordinance when someone has a tall yard and someone reports it. The city gives notice to the owner, and they have 5 days to mow it essentially, and if they don't mow it within that 5 days, the following week, the city would come and mow it and be charged a service charge. And in this pay-as-you-throw program, that same rationale is used, that property owner, we would notice, and would be given a week to be alerted that, hey, there might be something wrong in writing, and then they would have a chance to go out and look and bring it in compliance. In the following week, during the regular day, if it was still left out there, our crews would just simply pick it up and service the can or the cart, or bring it back to the resident's house and do a service charge of $25. And what we've, since February and March, we've issued 52 service charges. So we serve 10,000 customers a week, 80,000 a month, or 80,000 2 months.
Yeah, 2 months.
So 52 service charges, so it's a very low number. And we were expecting a lot more, to be honest. We sent out a lot of letters, just notifying people of, hey, well, you might want to go check this issue out, giving notices. But the service charges are very infrequent, so very low number. Our solid waste collection from the old program, the flat fee versus pay as you throw, in January, decreased 18%. In February, it decreased 28%. And in March, decreased 33% our solid waste, what we pay at the landfill to dispose of the solid waste. Meanwhile, our recycling has gone up 30% in January, 32% in February, 35% in March. So the program's working in terms of our goal of trying to increase recycling and decrease solid waste. And some of the things that I wanted to bring, what are some common areas that when we write violations, plastic bags in recycling carts, Kroger bags, anything plastic bags, the City of Lexington's recycling facility will not process these plastic bags. And we get charged basically if we bring plastic bags to the City of Lexington. So the cleaner the recycling we can bring to Lexington, the more revenue that we keep. So that's why it's kind of a battle, but it's on the lid. So every time someone throws something away, it's on the lid of what's acceptable in plastic bags. It's not. Styrofoam, trash and yard waste and recycle carts again is another top violation. Carts left out past their service dates. Those are easy corrections, and usually you're taking it back once they get a notice. We're having a lot of yard waste in black plastic bags, and they went outside the trash container like we used to pick up. A lot of people still, or some people are still putting those out in their notices. In the multifamily, just continued education and Spanish version of our rules.
I think one thing I would bring out in that, of those 80,000 pickups, we wrote 1,700, almost 1,800 violations in the 80,000, and only 52. I think that's an important number. That first of all, there's only 1,700 violations out of 80,000, but all except for 52 people corrected their problem. And I think, what we say, 22 of those 52 were related to multifamily. And probably most of those were related to recycling.
Which makes the fifth point on here, honestly, very relevant on here, which is the perhaps need for more education. Especially in enforcement.
Yes.
How the free pickup day go? Good.
Very well. Everybody, the only problem we're having is the week after, get everybody trained back into the program.
I've got a question about the free pickup day. I feel like we use our normal avenues of promotion to make people aware of that, and lots of folks were aware of it. the notice in the paper was distinct enough, I think. But I still got a few calls from folks after the pickup day asking when the free pickup day would be. That's the kind of thing where, like, if we were, I know we're not, but if we were sending out a monthly bill, that's the kind of thing where we could, a month in advance, literally send a notice to every household. Now, we're not in that position right now. Is that the kind of thing that we could use the reverse 911 system for? Could we send every landline an automated message the week before, letting them know that the free pickup day is coming? Is there a particular expense to the city associated with that? And that's probably more of a question for dispatcher than you all.
I don't know what the expense of that would be. It's a little hard, I don't know how that works with people who have cell phones.
I don't think it does. I think it just relates to landlines.
That can be done, there's no cost.
There's no cost for it. I mean, it just catches that.
We
that
pay the
more
fee no
people.
matter how long.
I mean, because we own the system, right?
Yeah,
So we just-
when we lease the
Okay.
Is that something we could look at next time?
Sure.
And definitely, these numbers are really promising, and encouraging. I'm glad to hear that the carts are being well received by the folks who actually had to handle them, by the staff that are collecting them. I'd say that at this point, in order to see this number keep increasing, because I think this 35% increase is great. I think we all know that we can do a lot better than this even. It seems at any event I go to anymore, we've got the recycling table there, which is great to see, and that shows them getting out at other events. Some cities manage to boost their rates pretty well simply by having an event dedicated just to recycling. So having offering a workshop or even having like a recycling fair where it's actually demonstrated to folks like what goes where, what you need to do to it, etc. Is that I think there would be some value in that. Putting that on the table. Another question about the yard waste and plastic bags. How prevalent a concern is that? Would it be possible for us to pick it up in a plastic bag if the bag's untied? Is that particularly more difficult to dump than a cart or a can? I mean, I know we get to ripping the bags open. That's
Guess you just don't know what's in the plastic bag.
right.
Because if it's mixed with trash, then
Sure.
it contaminates. And we pick our yard waste up in a garbage truck,
Yeah.
and so we have a hopper full of yard waste. If you
Right.
dump your plastic bag in the hopper and it's contaminated with trash, you just go through there and sort out all the trash. So by using the old trash cans
Yeah.
for the small loose stuff, I don't think it's real prevalent. I just think during spring pickup week again, people were able to use the plastic bags. And the following week, it kind of popped up again as, can we still use this?
Sure.
But I think it's using the old trash cans working well. One thing we have not seen is, I think early on in the process, there was a lot of concern about illegal dumps that were running, and we have not seen really any sign of that. There may be signs of people using private dumpsters to get rid of things, but as far as illegal dumping, I've not seen any of you, Mark. So that's on a very positive note.
That's something that our friends in the county were particularly concerned about. And I talked to folks over there, and Greg Butler told me that they were braced for some in this program like the vet, and he said he was pleasantly surprised to find that the precautionary measures they took turned out to be unnecessary.
And just the number of violations, and I think people are getting it. I think they're working with the system, they understand it, generally like it. And I think it's, given that we're almost at the end of a 3-month implementation period, it's much farther along from what we thought maybe 3 months would be a good barometer, but I think at this point it's really kicking in and people are liking the program so far.
And Mark has a real sense of it because he deals with it every day. Mrs. Martineau, he's our solid waste.
And I'd just like to throw these numbers out there for you. When we started in January, the number of garbage violations was 388. And for the month of March, it was down to 159. So using that as a primary educational tool, it's really having a positive effect with the community. And they're just continuing to decrease as well in the recycle violations as well. January being 437 to March being 169. So I think that's a positive there.
See a lot of grass clippings and plastic bags?
Yes.
I think that though, like grass clippings and yard waste, I think that's an issue that we've always had where people putting it in plastic bags. I don't think it's something inherent to the new system because I can remember when we were talking about the new system, I got a number of calls and people said, well, I won't be able to sit in my yard waste. And we even made an exception with the old trash cans that you could use those to try to help them out. But I mean, I think even then, we just didn't notice as much because we'd throw it in the can and move on, or not throw the bag in the truck and take it to the landfill. But now that we, sort of changed our culture here and really keyed in on yard waste and recycling and those various aspects of waste collection, I think that, I don't think that it's a new problem, but I think it's something that we'll probably start seeing as more education goes along, improved.
We get all the contracts, to sell the bags, like at Kroger and Walmart.
I see there.
They are at Tic-Tac, we are working with Kroger. We're in the final stages of getting that.
The ball's in their court. We had to fill out a bunch of paperwork for vendor information, and we sent that, so they've received all the information and set up whatever, so Mark can go to Kroger on either side of town and drop off bags for them to sell. And the bags will just be sold for $3. It's $3 a roll.
It's 18 a roll.
18 a roll, and there'll be no, they're not going to collect any money and keep any money, as I understand it. It's just going to be a pass-through. Same as kind of community service type.
And they'll be in the trash bag aisle, you don't have to go up to the front counter. Right?
As far as I know.
It would be smart market, but.
I guess I've only got one other comment before you go on to the landlord limits. I'm glad to hear that the recycling violations and the fine to notice ratio is very small. It's very small. I have heard from 3 people now that they want to recycle, but that the letter they got from the first, the very first violation notice, it lists, and I haven't actually seen these letters myself, but I guess it lists just all the potential penalties and everything associated with continued non-compliance. And I think even though obviously I think we all intended that as kind of for your information, so we weren't necessarily threatening people the first time around, but just kind of letting them know what is and isn't acceptable before the fines kick in with repeat violation. I think some people are finding that first letter so threatening or even off-putting that they're just walking away and saying, I'm not even going to risk. I'm not going to risk prosecution by continuing to recycle, so I'm just going to start putting everything back in my trash.
Well, I think if you look, there's some samples there that we've made. The first notice is, hey, you put something else that's not in compliance with the ordinance, and you need to get it fixed up. I think we have to tell them what happens if you don't do that, because then you're catching them blindsided. Maybe the wording can be changed to soften it, I don't know. But,
and I think that's all I'm saying.
We use boots stickers,
right?
Under the old program.
Yeah.
Kind of soften, if someone's put something out, not in compliance, you put an OOP sticker on their hand. And they probably get mad, but it wasn't that big a deal. But this is just to put a notice that there's something going on. It's not a fine, it's just we're going to go check this out. But then on the 3rd page, that's when the invoice, that's the 52 invoices we've sent out for a service charge. that's the point when you would receive notice that there's been a service charge assessed to your property.
And I think it's important to note that in order for you to get that, you've had to left your stuff on the street for over 5 days. If they take that can back to the house, then they're not gonna get that. So they have left a tagged can or bag or whatever on the street for over 5 days, and so then we come along, we have to pick it up according to the ordinance.
I just want to be aware that some people are feeling that way. That the very first notice, some people are feeling that as a slap on the wrist. That's all.
Okay.
But all in all, y'all handle this very gracefully. We appreciate all the work you've all been putting into it.
Mayor, can I ask one more question?
Pardon me?
On the information indicating the amount of decrease in solid waste that's being collected this year versus last year, does that take into consideration how much solid waste is not being collected from Frankfort Housing Authority and from the larger than 8 apartment units? Because since we're not collecting those anymore, that would show a reduction in and of itself.
Right. That's just a straight number.
Okay. But, so, while that might not actually indicate quite that much is not going to the landfill, because whoever's picking it up is taking it to the landfill. Likewise, on the second page, when you're talking about recycling being collected, perhaps the percentage of recycling is actually higher than the numbers you got here, because...
We've shed 1,000 units.
Yeah. Yeah, so actually your recycling percentage could be higher than 35%, because, you're collecting 176 tons from a fewer number of residences or individual units, so that's kind of interesting.
Although, of course, it's also we're done in pure fiscal terms. In pure fiscal terms, in terms of tipping fee and recycling revenue. I mean, obviously, these are these.
Those don't reflect the participation rates, those strict times.
But I think the point that Rob just made about the recycling rate in particular is that there are some folks we're not collecting from now who we were collecting from before. And going back to what I was saying earlier, I mean, anything we can do to expand or even reestablish in some cases our recycling collection. I mean, people are putting money in these recycling carts and giving it to us. So the more we collect, the better off we are. Ready to move on?
If you finish that, Mr. Mayhem.
Just want to ask a question. Mayor, is it, I guess this is for Director, do we still have items when we take recyclable material to the center licensing that are still not at times, if there's not a market for it? I know glass would be one. Anything else that is not actually every time going into the recycling stream? It's still, some of it gets ground and is left, and then has to go back to the landfill. But I know that was an issue before.
I'm gonna let David, we had an audit done with the city of Lexington, and when we started this program with Lexington, they kind of took a sample of what we bring them, and they weigh each item, glass, aluminum, whatever the material is, and they do a composite sample of what we bring them, and they apply that to every ton that we take to Lexington. And whatever the market rate is, we get paid on based on that sample. And we had a sample, was it 2 weeks ago? A couple weeks ago. And what I don't know if this answers your question, but in our sample, we were 5% glass, 5% trash. And so 90% of our sample were paid items: aluminum, steel, paper, cardboard. So that is very, very good.
Yeah.
So,
I ran into the guy who does, one of the guys who does that sampling at Lexington a bit ago. Once we got to talking about the whole system, and he realized that I was with the city, he complimented me pretty heavily on the quality of the stream we're sending. He said they had just done the sample like that, and that it was a very low contamination rate, which is a relief, because I think we were all worried that the trash could have been higher.
that's exactly right. It's still clean. We've always try to keep a clean product going to Lexington so we keep our relationship up and keep money coming in.
Which ties into my next question, because the rate they pay us per ton is based on that sample.
Yes.
The last sample we got was done, was probably about a year ago, right? But it was done prior, whatever it was done prior to us collecting glass curbside.
Yes.
So did that substantively, did these new stats substantively alter what we're getting paid per ton? Because it was
5% is glass, so we don't get paid for that. When we deliver a ton of material to Lexington, 10% essentially is not revenue.
Okay, see, because that's kind of exciting, because all of our calculations in terms of recycling revenue are based on base of $100,000 annually, which is what we were getting before we started collecting glass curbside. Now, glass weighs a lot, so when the glass got thrown in there, our actual recycling revenue last year was $140,000, but we were still calculating off a base of $100,000 on the assumption that when the next sample came in and showed the increase in glass, that they would adjust the base back down to 100. I know I'm getting at I know that doesn't make a lot of sense. Does that make sense? But it sounds like we're still operating on a base that's closer to the 140 than the 100. Is that accurate?
I think it's too early to
With
tell.
a margin of like 5%, too early to tell.
I think it's too early to tell, because we just got numbers from them, and I think it was just for February.
Okay.
So we need a little bit more time to get some pay numbers from them. We can answer that.
Are we just gonna get those kind of on a monthly basis, or
Yeah.
they don't actually provide a per ton? They don't actually provide us with their calculations?
I think they do, but I don't think it's instantaneous.
Okay.
Is that right, Steve? Okay.
Because that's obviously, I mean, in terms of trying to, balance the next budget, and I know that the fee itself is bringing in less revenue than the previous fee, but obviously, it'd be good to see some of that offset by working in these, calculations regarding the recycling revenue and decreased shipping fees.
Yeah, I guess the question I was really asking is, since there's not really much of a market for glass, the recycling drop-off place in Lexington is not recycling all of the glass material every time, from what I understand.
If I can't answer that. The last time we were there, they told us they were shipping it, but they still don't pay for it.
Okay, that's right.
As opposed to the landfill, we have to pay them to take it.
No, that's what he told us, so. But it's still a known payout.
But my understanding, I'm just trying to clarify, that sometimes glass does go to the landfill in Lexington, has gone to the landfill in Lexington, not just from us, but from everybody.
Personally, when I was there, the glass pile that was piling up, they said at some point, we have to get rid of some of this glass so we can operate, because it just piles up. And they took some of it, they said, to the Lexington C&D landfill, and they were not specific. They may have used it in road bed, trying to keep their roads maintained, burying pipes. They didn't specify what it was used for. They just said we have to take it something just to have some room to operate. And so they were not specific on what they did with it at the landfill. It was something in place of aggregate, or they would just dump it in the C&D landfill. But it wasn't a landfill like we have here in Frankfort County. It's just a household. A C&D is like construction debris,
Construction and demolition debris.
Okay.
so it doesn't have the garbage like household waste.
It just triggered, okay.
Oh, go ahead, I'm
It just
sorry.
triggered a question we asked about the glass. Can you say that it's costing us about $20,000 a year to take glass, or collect glass?
Well, the glass specifically, it's $43 a ton charge when we take a ton of material to Lexington. That's what they charge us for processing and marketing that material. Versus if we took the glass like before to the landfill, but just raising your regular household trash, it was $23 a ton is what our gate rate is at the landfill.
Okay.
So that's the difference. And I guess we were concerned how much glass, but I guess maybe the good news is our sample is only 5%. So every time we bring to Lexington, 5%.
I was trying to get the numbers in my head when we first started all this. It was said that it costs the city about $20,000 a year to take the glass to Lexington. That's what I recall here. Is that not right?
That's what we kind of,
Yeah.
the volume of glass
Yeah,
that was
right.
diverted to go to
Sure,
Lexington.
right. All right, then, I was just looking here about the recycling picked up is just about double. We had 20 tons, now we got 38 tons. And so would it now be costing close to $40,000?
It's all based on that percentage.
Yeah.
But when they take the sample in Lexington,
Yeah.
that may stick for 2 years. So that's
Okay.
that would be
All right.
a win for,
I'm ready to move on if you guys are.
Yeah, it's worth noting that picking up the glass actually increased our revenue $40,000 the first year, because it was going into the tonnage without being necessarily included in the sample. So the collecting the glass has actually put us $40,000 ahead so far, and I know it might balance out over time, but with only 5%. With only 5% in the stream, I don't expect that's kind of.
I'm getting some
If I may, Mayor,
discussion.
I'd like to request that we move on. We have people who have been waiting on this agenda for quite some time to speak, so if we could just move along on this discussion.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Next item for discussion is the landlord-tenant task force. And Gary Miller, if you don't mind coming forward and,
We haven't talked, Mr. Jones, we haven't talked about landlord tenant issues with Mr. Bullock yet.
oh, I'm sorry, I just keep getting on. Landlord-tenant issues.
Well, thank you so much.
We appreciate your patience.
And we should have other people, if you're right.
Well, let me pass this out if I may first. This was drafted by Mr. Moore, and the handwritten portion was marked up by me as a suggestion. If I may, let me recap just a bit. When this garbage ordinance came out in February, the Landlord Tenants Association appeared before work committee of the commission and discussed the fact that we felt it was entirely unfair for the landlord to be responsible for actions of the tenant. At that time, we thought we understood that action would be taken to remedy the situation fairly soon. We wanted and passed out to you an amendment of the garbage ordinance which would exempt landlords from the actions of the tenants. Commissioner Turner came up with the idea that instead of this, possibly an agreement by the tenant to be responsible for his actions on the garbage would be the better idea, and that the tenant would sign a document which would be sent to the city, which would say, for this particular unit, I am responsible. The very last meeting, I guess it was at the commission, it was determined that Mr. Moore would draft the letter that would be signed by the tenant and submit it for this meeting. I received a copy of it. I was on vacation, as was Mr. Moore, and I received a copy of this afternoon, maybe 20 minutes before the commission meeting. I marked it up a little bit quickly. I have to admit I'm a little disappointed in the slowness that this is taking. For one thing, it would appear to me that if you adopt Commissioner Turner's proposal, you're still going to have an amendment to the ordinance, to Chapter 50. And the amendment has not even been drafted for anybody's consideration. So the original suggestion that the commission was going to move rather rapidly on this did not happen. And I'm concerned that the landlord and the landlord-tenant and garbage issue is being lost in this further discussion. Even the discussion we just had seemed to be centered on the owner-occupied property. You weren't thinking in terms of the landlord-tenant issues, which are really basically separate. And while I'm mentioning this, let me point out, we've been promised a Spanish listing of the ordinance. I keep hearing that it's in its process. I have not seen it. The Hispanic population, and that's growing in this city, oftentimes rent, and they simply have a hard time understanding the recycling program. They have to be educated on this. Now, as to Commissioner Turner's proposals, the landlords prefers the complete exemption. I would say this is better than nothing. If the tenant knows that he or she is going to be fined if they don't comply, they can understand, I think, a lot quicker what the recycling program requires, and will have a tendency to comply more easily. I'm feeling that some tenants are dragging their feet because they think the landlord's going to clean it up after the citation is issued so that they won't have to pay the $25 fine. I would ask that the commission adopt an ordinance preferably to exempt landlords. Otherwise, if you feel it's better to adopt Commissioner Turner's proposal, and I would ask that the commission look at my changes. I would like to point out, I think it would be burdensome to try and get a copy of the lease sent to the city, and you don't need all that paper anyway. That's 8 pages of hard copy that would be coming to you. There is no monthly cost if you have the regular small can, so the word "if any" would be helpful there. The main thing is the notary public, which would be extremely burdensome. I have a notary public in my office. That's not going to be a problem for me, but the average landlord would not have one accessible, and asking a person that is renting to take it to a notary public, some people simply wouldn't understand or have difficulty in doing that.
Or to ask them, and I can also clarify, or to ask a landlord who's collecting rent to take it to a notary public. would be part of the zone change.
Well, you couldn't do that. You'd have to have the tenant there to sign in front of
Right,
it.
but the landlord, and what I'm saying, I'm just pointing out, that the landlord could arrange that
Yes.
in part, because obviously it's in the best interest of the landlord to get the tenant to sign this, so I just wanted to point that out, that it's not just the, I understand the burden, but it's not just the tenant who would probably be going against trying to get this taken care of. I'm sure the landlord would be helping the process along as well.
Probably. I would ask that the commission take action on this. Let's get off the dime and do something about it, please. I thought I understood that that was going to happen. So far, it has not happened. I'll answer any questions, Commissioner.
Well, I'll respond first. At the outset of this discussion, I recall very clearly saying that, I was hoping we could handle this as expeditiously as possible, but even then, I didn't see us getting it done any sooner than our April voting meeting. And I still think it's possible for us to be on track for that time frame. It would require us to have a special call meeting, perhaps before our next meeting to hear a first reading, and then it is still possible for us to vote on this month, as we said at the beginning. In terms of this question, whether or not landlords should be exempted entirely, or we should go with this, I still think that we don't have any, from the city standpoint, I really don't think we have much, in terms of two options, I don't think we have much choice but to go with the option that has the landlord opting out, because we know who, we have to have a default position.
You're talking about this.
Right, in terms of the opt-out. The city has to have a default position. We have to know who we can hold liable or accountable for this. And we know who the property owners are. We know your names, we know how to contact you. On the other side of the coin, in terms of renters, we don't always know whether or not a property is being rented, whether or not it's reverted from rental to owner occupied. And even then, we rarely officially know who the renters are. So even though we might know that it's a rental unit, we still don't even know who we're dealing with. We'll never know who your renters are unless you, on a case-by-case basis, actually let us know and transfer the responsibility to them, which is what this document does, which I think represents a really fair compromise. It honors your inherent request, which is that you all be able to pass this responsibility along to your tenants. I think that the notes made to this draft are, for the most part, pretty well advised. So I also don't see the need for us right now to receive a copy of the lease. And my understanding is that you're not even under a legal obligation. I could be wrong. Do landlords need to have a lease?
You can wrap it up.
That's what I thought. So that, I think that makes that necessity even more
A
notable.
lot of landlords do. May I just respond quickly? I can count votes, and I don't think there's enough votes, maybe I'm wrong, on the commission to get a complete exemption for the landlords at this time. If I'm wrong, please speak up. But if there aren't those votes, I understand what you're saying about what you're calling the compromise, and I'd like to see us go ahead and get this enacted.
I agree about the notary public. It's, especially for legal reasons, I'm sure the city solicitor would back this up. I mean, there's always a little more oomph to this kind of thing if there's at least a witness. But having said that, we could replace the notary public just with the signature of the landlord.
Yes, you could have a certification by the landlord that this particular individual is to be a resident at this address.
And then the whole thing's clean. We've got those signatures. That's it.
I think that would be fine. I thought of that coming over here as I was driving. Now, you may want to revisit the complete exemption of the landlord at a later time, that you could see how this works, at least for a while.
The only other note I have in terms of this draft is that I think it would be a good idea. A lot of tenants have never even been consulted about what size cart they want or need. Some landlords reached out to the tenants and had that, others just went with the deep out, others just all went with the smaller cart. But as long as folks are signing something, you know, kind of accepting responsibility for the program, then this should probably include giving them, you know, the choice of carts and explanation of the default medium size will be provided if they don't.
And they would be responsible for it.
And then they choose the size, and then they tell us what size they need. Because right now, I mean, ideally, just take owner occupied. You know, everybody's getting an opportunity to tell us what size cart they need before we move on. And we should give tenants that opportunity as well.
Mr. Lee?
Thanks, Mayor. I just have a question for the solicitor, or anybody who can answer it. Okay, if someone, this form just is an agreement by a tenant to accept the responsibility for paying for the garbage pickup. It doesn't require a tenant. It's just an optional thing that the landlord can work out with the tenant. Is that?
Is that the question?
That was the question.
And that's correct. The landlord would work this agreement out with the tenant, and then the tenant would sign it. I wish that I could take full credit for drafting this, but this document was drafted by me and Jeff and Tom and Fred, as city manager, so we all, you know, added different parts to it. One of the reasons why the notary public was required was that if when you try and enforce a document, many times a person will say, well, that's not my signature. I don't know who signed that. And of course, if you have a notary that has notarized that person's signature, then that concern is minimized. I think if you have the landlord who signed it at the same time, then of course you call the landlord into court, and then the landlord's going to have to say, yes, John Doe did sign that. So the landlord's signature would, I think, work just as well as long as you get the landlord to come to court. I think for enforcement purposes, I think just from a legal standpoint, it would be nice to have a copy of the lease attached in that way. It does create more paperwork, but I think it helps ensure that everyone knows that it's a formal document. They understand it when they sign that it's important. But in any event, we can make some, I don't have any problems with certain tweaks that Mr. Bullock has suggested, if that's the way the city commission wishes to go. I think I did talk with Jeff and Tom about using this type of form previously, and I know they have some concerns about it. And did I answer your question?
Yes, if I could further, Mayor, just the other, if a tenant refuses tenant is an agreement, there's no enforcement mechanism other than to go back on the landlord.
Between the landlord, I mean, a lot of this kind of thing is between the landlord and the tenant.
That's correct.
May I point out that the real problem with this is not future tenants, because as a landlord, and I think as most landlords, we're going to require this if you're going to rent the property. So that won't be a problem for future tenants. The real problem is the existing tenants. There's no real advantage to them doing this, except that the landlord can say, I won't renew your lease at the end of your lease period. But other than that, there's no leverage for the landlord. So that's a weakness in this proposal. It'll eventually work itself out over a year or so in most instances.
And then that really got to what I was going to ask next is, it's almost, you have an agreement already with your contractual agreement through the lease with your tenants already, and to amend it, they would have to agree to amend the provisions of your lease. And if they refuse to do it, your only choice is to keep moving forward. But you feel like in the future, if I may, Mayor, this would be a requirement with your lease, and you feel like that will work?
That will work for future tenants. Now, don't misunderstand me.
I know this
The
is not-
landlords and the landlord association are adamant that they should be exempted completely. I don't want you to misunderstand what I'm saying, but as a practical matter, unless there are more votes here than I think, this is better than what we have now.
Like I said,
Maybe I'm counting votes wrong.
I recall we were trying to write up the ordinance and come up with ideas with the landlords, that one thing the city wanted was some teeth, to say that if people are not obeying the rules, we need something in order to say, all right, we're gonna get our money back from a fine. I'm not 100% agree with all the fines that's been discussed, so, but as a landlord, what teeth do you think we could get from a tenant? I mean,
The same as the landlord.
mhm.
You would issue your citation and your fine to the tenant.
Mhm.
Then if the tenant does not pay, you sue the tenant,
Mhm.
just as you would with the landlord. Now, the one thing you wouldn't have is a lien on the property.
Right.
And I guarantee you, if you put a lien on any of my properties, we're gonna see each other. Mr. Moore and I are gonna square off. And I think that's probably true of most of the landlords.
Or even homeowners in general as well.
Well, maybe, but the landlords are gonna have the point that you're charging us and putting a lien on our property for something that somebody else did, not something we did. And I think that'll sell pretty good.
But it's also to point out, there's also precedent there for that as well. I mean, if a tenant is responsible, I mean, we keep going back to this. If a tenant is responsible for cutting the grass, it doesn't matter if he doesn't cut the grass for 4 weeks and the city has to go out there and cut it, they're gonna go after the property owner. And courts have upheld that in the past. Is that correct?
I'm not aware of it. I haven't researched that issue. I don't really know at this point.
And I'd be comfortable that the lien would be upheld by the court. When you look at, for example, environmental law, if I were to lease my property to John Doe Incorporated and they, in their operations, contaminate my property, then not only is the entity that contaminated the property, but also the owner of the property is required to clean it up because I'm controlling my tenant.
I respectfully disagree with my colleague, Mr. Moore.
I guess I will note though that any citations we could issue under this, any citation we could issue to renters under this system, it seems to me to carry about the same weight as about as much as a parking ticket, which is to say not as much as a lien, but I mean, generally sufficient to ensure compliance. Most people respond to citations.
I'd like to request the commission not to move forward in this direction with the agreement to pay for property service. I'd be able to transfer that to the tenant. I would propose with changes as indicated.
I agree, but if staff have anything to say.
One of the issues that, the reality of our program right now, our carts are not identified. So a fourplex, there's no identification on each of the carts. We do not know who the tenants, where they live in that fourplex, if that's their can in unit A or B, and it's gonna make it very difficult to know when a cart's in a violation, what tenant owns this cart because it's not marked.
Then because the scanners aren't working.
Well, the physical,
There's no unit A on the cart.
But the scanner, I mean, we should be able to scan the carts and that should be able to tell us.
well, but if you've got an eightplex, unless it's on that cart, they don't have a scanner. They may come and pick somebody else's cart and take it back to their house. So those could get all, between those 8 or
Or,
6 or however many, they can get all jumbled. And so, we had the cards, we had them unmarked, we've had them switched out. We're looking into a means of trying to mark the lid somewhere that's not so permanent that we can't reuse it, but that, that's just a time issue that we need to do whether we do this or not.
I suspect that any number of sticker solution could probably work it out. Or at the very least, if somebody opts to be a renter receiving, or taking responsibility for the service themselves, then when we receive this, then we slap a sticker with their name and address on top of the card. Is that?
Really hampers our enforcement programs, to be honest. We're treating property owners differently. One issue is if you own a private residence, single-family home, you're being treated different than an owner of an apartment, a multifamily, because we put a lien on you if you own your own home, but if you are an apartment owner, go back to my tenant. And so some of the issues, I guess, that's one, is we're treating property owners different. And we just have no knowledge of who the tenant is in most cases, or a means of collecting a fine even. And so what that does is it erodes the program, in my opinion, on the whole code enforcement issue, is when we treat the tenants differently, when we go after, try to go after the tenants. That's another big issue we tried on the front end, is try to get this on the utility bill. Then it becomes, that's very doable, but this agreement, I'm concerned about how it weakens our enforcement of the whole program.
Well, I'd say there's two sides of that coin though. Because if let's say we've got three options here. Let's say that the extreme on one end is the way we're doing it now, where renters, who are in many cases the actual user of the service, assume no responsibility at all. The other extreme is what Mr. Bullock and the landlords are proposing, where the landlords assume no responsibility at all. And then we've got this middle ground that kind of allows that to be transferred to the more appropriate designated party. There's no way we can do this, even the way we're doing it now, to treat everybody fair across the board. Because right now we've got plenty of residents who can abuse the system and expect to not be held accountable for that at all. The buck will just get passed to the property owner. And one of the points I've tried to maintain since the beginning of this discussion is that the pay-throw system doesn't work unless the person using the system is paying for it. Because what it is a fee structure that encourages less waste and more recycling. And if you're not paying the fee, then you've got no incentive to actually use the program the way it's intended to be used. So I understand what you're saying, but I'm saying those problems in particular exist on each extreme of the scale. But I think this middle ground addresses your all's concerns about being able to identify who's responsible, because the responsibility can't transfer from an identified property owner to an identified tenant without us being notified, without, this ensures identification of the responsible party. And I think it also, I understand the problems it creates in terms of enforcement, but I think that's easier to work around than the problem we have with the folks using the program not paying for it, therefore having no incentive to actually, my sense is that if we put this in place, that this alone would continue to drive the recycling number up and continue to bring more people into the program the way it was conceived and the way it's supposed to work in the first place. If let's take one option off the table for the sake of discussion, which is keeping things the way they are. If the choice is between this agreement or absolving the landlords entirely and just focusing on the tenants, I assume you agree that from a compliance and enforcement standpoint, that this is vastly preferable to Mr. Bullock's original suggestion. And I don't mean to put words in your mouth. I guess that's a question.
We did not propose this. This is something that was brought for your all's consideration, so.
Understood, but if you had to choose between this and Mr. Bullock's suggestion.
With all due respect, I think from our end, they're almost one and the same. From a logistics standpoint of enforcing it. That's.
Mr. Gordon.
You've been keeping records and trending the violations. How does that look on these units? The size unit?
Of course, January, we did not send out any violations. That was just kind of part of the educational. February and March, they've been trending downward. The number of violations averaged 20 a month for the whole city. So it's a very low number of service charges we're even sending out. So the $25 charges are very low and trending downward. So again, that was kind of the point of the memo, was to communicate this program is working, and the code enforcement component is going down and down as people get used to it. And as we switch out cart sizes to get the appropriate size cart, a family of 4, if they have a small can, it might not work, and so they continually getting letters. And so maybe they switch their can out to a larger size, and the letters go away. So I think it's getting better as we go forward, but and we don't know who the tenants are. Even if we get a signed letter, if there's a move out, whose responsibility is it to get us that information? So this draft includes, I further agree to notify the city public works department when my lease with the landlord terminates. And assuming that we're charging somebody. Again, it's all on the tenant. It's not on the owner to give us that information. We don't know who the tenant is now.
And we're not sure how they're going to build this. It could be there 3 months and be gone. Well, they won't get a bill until 3 months, if they move in at the beginning of the 6-month term. We won't even know where they are to send them a bill.
Sure.
And there's issues that we need to work out before this thing is just grabbed and said, yes, let's go with it.
Yeah,
How you doing, Mark?
you're Mark. The answer is somewhat simple. Just go up and knock on the door. Mark is very good at investigation on this. I've had experience with him. He does a good job. He can go up and find out who is responsible for that individual can, if there's a question. Now, on a duplex, usually there's one place and another place to put the can. On a fourplex, usually they line up, but not always. If there is a question, go up and ask, knock on the door, put a notice, call me at such and such a time. That enforcement is no greater than the landlord going around trying to find out who has, which tenant put that stuff in the other person's recycling bin. And that's a tough one. It's a tough one for the city, it's a tough one for the landlord. This will encourage tenants, if they know they're going to have to pay dollars, to comply with the program. And in my judgment, will improve the recycling program, as opposed to causing people that flagrantly violate, thinking that they'll get by with it and not pay the fine. That's possible. I don't think you'll see that much of that occurring, in my judgment.
For the most part, I agree, but I think Tom has identified the most legit wrinkle to this, which is the fact that we bill on a 6-month cycle. So we're talking about circumstances where tenants aren't going to be moving in and out just every 6 months. Folks aren't just going to be occupying those cycles.
Well,
It's answers to every problem, but I feel like that is the inherent problem with this.
if I might respond, that's for the bigger can issue. That's not for a fine.
Right, that's for assuming responsibility for the fee.
For the fee for the bigger can. Most tenants are going to take the small can.
But not, certainly not all.
Almost all.
I don't know. Because we've been doing this with homeowners. We already.
Homeowners are different.
Sure. No, you're right. And renters are in different financial circumstances, and most probably will go with the free can, but not all. we have to know how we are going to handle the billing for somebody who's moved out. Let's say we send out a bill in July, trying to bill somebody for the first 3 months of the year, you know, they moved to Texas 3 months ago. Right? I mean, that's the challenge, right? I mean, that's the problem.
That's one of the things that we haven't had time to work out.
But if I may, you're tying the larger can to the violation, and the two are really separate issues.
But if a person is a violation, even if you have a smaller can, the address that we have on file is at the address they no longer live at. So how do we go after them? That's the question. That's the issue.
I mean, for the most part, I mean, the violations come out. They don't just come out every 6 months. I mean, the violations presumably come out while somebody's still occupying the space. So I think that's less of a concern in terms of the cycle. I think the concern is purely the billing cycle.
Except to the extent that the violation,
You get to a point.
when it happens, there's a 5-day, and then they have 45 days to pay.
Sure.
So you've got 50 days, you've almost got 2 months from the time that happened before they would actually be due. And so there's issues like that.
But that's
I'm not
true for
saying they
parking
can't be
tickets as
worked
well.
out, but
But that's also true for parking tickets. It's, you know, it's easy enough for somebody to come to town or to be in town and move out, get a parking ticket.
that kind of follows you, doesn't it? If you have excessive parking tickets,
Excessive.
you can have your car towed.
Sure.
I can't really tow a house.
But it seems like it's relatively easy to go to Davidson, skipping town on one little citation like that. I mean, I'm less concerned about that than I'm about the bill. The billing's the problem.
And I think we have to go back just to the number of actual violations. It's 52 out of 80,000. And we figured roughly 22 of those are related to multifamily. So even less than half, very less than half, are dealing with multifamily. So it's not like it's a huge problem right now.
I mean, would it be crazy talk to, I assume we're not talking about that many people signing up for this and choosing the medium or large car size. 'Cause I think this is what makes a good point about most renters are gonna, they're relatively smaller families compared to owner-occupied homes. Sometimes, not always, but they're often more financially distressed. I mean, I hate to stereotype, but that's, I think demographically across the board, that's pretty fair. So I don't think we're talking about that many people who will have this billing problem with. I mean, would it be crazy to actually just send those people a monthly bill? I mean, that costs us, what, $1 a person per month roughly?
I think we're getting into the whole bag.
Oh, I know, but it is a bag of worms. I mean,
I think what we, if I may, Commissioner, I think from what I'm gathering from this discussion is there's no way we can make a decision on this. You know, I mean, there's so many unanswered questions that we don't have answers to that, I mean, that staff needs time to figure out. I mean, this is what I support, but we've got to work some kinks out. We can't just throw something out there and then, you know, a couple months later, you guys pay for it, you know?
Sure.
That's sort of where I'm getting with the conversation is that there's not answers to some of these questions that, you know, we need to have to make an informed decision.
No, I agree, but I think we need to know what the questions are.
Sure. I was just throwing that in there.
In that regard, I have a question for Mr. Bullock. If, you can see how complicated all of this is.
I really don't think it's that complicated. I think we're doing a lot of what-ifs that probably aren't going to happen.
I disagree. I promise you that if we do this, I promise you, this isn't a what if, there will be people, tenants, who sign up for something that requires a bill, who leave within the window of a billing cycle.
Oh, I don't disagree with you. That's why
But we
I'm
need to,
concerned
yeah.
that you're tying that to getting a larger can. The two are separate. You don't have to do that. You're adding problems you don't need.
I don't understand how we avoid the problem.
Well,
Are
you
saying
just
don't
make
let
it
tenants
just for the
work?
violation. You don't put in extra can put in the can issue on this.
You're saying the owner continues to pay for
To
the
pay the
can
fees.
If the tenant wants to get a larger can, actually, I think you can work it out so that the landlord, the tenant, you can set up a billing for that tenant. But
Oh, wait. I think I see a solution that's relatively graceful and simple, relatively, which is to say that this agreement just refers to the fines and for the code enforcement, which is what Bob's saying. And if a tenant, let's say a tenant has a small can and wants a larger can, and they work it out with the landlord, where they say, look, you pay for my larger can, I'll sign this waiver, and I'll give you $4 a month.
or I'll pay
And
for
then it's your
it,
problem
however you
solved.
want to work it out.
Right? But as in the landlord and the tenant can work out the fee side of it, I think the concern the landlords are having more than anything is the violations.
Sure. Yeah, and I've worked that out with some of my tenants, that very way.
Because that would be real easy for the landlords to work out, because even though it's not, I think that's actually really. So all we have to do is just take out references to the fee and to the cart choices and let the, in that sense, let the landlord continue to be the middleman between the tenant and the city, in terms of what size cart the tenant has.
Yes, that's correct. It's only the fine that we're concerned about.
I understand that you all would still have concerns with this agreement for other reasons, but that would at least mitigate or even alleviate the billing concerns.
Yeah, I think.
Where we just don't even allow, we still don't allow for the actual direct billing of the tenant by the city. All we're talking about is the transfer of code enforcement responsibility.
Right here,
I think that makes sense.
the actual fine itself, if the tenant doesn't pay and they moved away, there's some split on who actually is going to ultimately pay that.
I think it's pretty cut and dry. I mean, I think we pursue the tenant, in some cases we don't get them. I mean, people get away with not paying citations on occasion, which is unfortunate. For the most part, people pay the citations, and in many circumstances, we can track most down. I mean, I think some folks will slip through the crack.
I think, excuse me, if we're gonna file a lawsuit to try to collect $25, on a lawsuit
Costs more, that's what I'm
costs
saying.
considerably more than $25.
That's why I keep comparing this with parking tickets.
And then if we try to track people down, we'll spend considerably more money than the $25.
$4 a month, Bob, we'll just send them all to you for $4 a month.
No, I think that's true, and that's why people can get away with skipping out on a single parking citation. And that's why we don't go after people unless they have excessive citations. I mean, there's already, but the fact that that's a wrinkle doesn't mean that we shouldn't issue parking citations. Because most people pay them. I think most people would pay these.
Most citizens, I think most citizens do, but if you're moving around the countryside, then you probably don't.
Sure, and renters move around the countryside less often than drivers.
I think you got it.
I think there's still some issues that we need to work out as far as how do we tell which can belongs to which apartment.
Marking the, so
Which is really just a matter of marketing cans.
And Mr. Bullock said, you know, well, you can go from can to can, but there's only so many you can do in a day.
Well, the only cans
We only have one guy to do it.
But the only cans we need to mark are really the only carts we need to mark are the carts of the people who sign this form. So if Mr. Bullock, for example, has a fourplex, and only one person assumes responsibility, we mark that one can, we know to hold that one can responsible, the one person who signed that responsible for what happens in that can. The stuff that happens in the other can, it doesn't matter whose cart it is, because all that responsibility transfers to Mr. Bullock anyway.
Well, you've got numbers on the cans now.
Sure, but the numbers they're identified with the
Address,
address.
Yeah,
not the unit.
Not you.
Right.
but there are four different numbers for fourplex, isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so all you have to do is take those numbers and say, this is for apartment 1, this is apartment 2, this is apartment 3, this is apartment 4.
But you have to make sure, Bob, But those tents don't take each other's cans.
Well, that's gonna be a problem. no
That's why
matter
we
what.
want to work out though. That's some of the issues we need to work out.
That's why I'd say the sticker identifying characteristic is more relevant than the scanner solution, because anybody can look at it, including the tenants, and know that it is or isn't their card. And in terms of the folks who aren't signing this waiver, it doesn't matter if they mix and match their cards.
That's right. It'll be the same
We
problem.
got a code enforcement person here, wants to
Welcome.
I don't want to chime in, but I do have some experience with the enforcement side. My first comment is going to be, if you're going to tie a can to a specific unit and a specific tenant of that unit, that cost of however you're going to market or identify it should not be the city's. Because the landlord's the one who's asking you to have it done by somebody else. My opinion, shouldn't be a burden or a cost of the city. Secondly, on the enforcement, there's a bag, a white Glad bag, sitting on the ground. Whose is it? Which tenant is it? It's a violation of our ordinance. How is our enforcer, our staff, want to know whose bag it is? Who do I assign it to?
Well, just like you do in Quincy,
A chair.
Illinois, you look through the bag and see if there's any mail-in or anything like that.
And if one employee is going to then subject himself to elements inside the bag that he shouldn't be subject himself to,
But we're already there.
And-
right? Like that
That's
would-
already doing.
not on a regular basis, and he could never do that on a regular basis because he would never get done throughout the day to get cited on the cycle. We shouldn't subject our employees to that, to have to verify whose trash inside this bag is. What if it's just a chair? It's a move out. I moved out over the weekend. I didn't tell the landlord, I'm bailing, I'm moving town. There's all this stuff on the yard. Mattress, chairs, recliner, whatever, pillowcases. Whose is it? We're gonna knock on every door and say, is this yours? Nope, not mine. Knock on this door, nope, not mine. No one's home. Well, it must be theirs, because it didn't answer. That's-
Well, I mean, the bulky stuff we pick up,
Do this.
we can pick up that.
Not really.
The non-evacuation.
Right. So how is our enforcement inspector supposed to handle that? Properly tag the right person, properly cite the right person. We send a lot of violations, we send very few citations.
Sure. Although also in that
Now there will
instance,
be
I think the property owner would know who
a lot more
is
citations.
responsible for the move out.
I think you'll have more citations in this scenario, personally. And I haven't seen the form, but it might be a great time to also require the owner, the landlord, to provide proof that they had a current home occupancy for the city.
Well, I agree, this is a great opportunity
You mean certificate.
for us to ensure that.
To see a recent rental that is valid, that is not done 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Just suggestions.
Right, no, I think that's
I
good.
think it's impossible for one employee to do this. And this is the items that's not in a can, that's going to be possible. In a time-sensitive manner, and in an effective manner, or in any reality of way of enforcement.
I think we've been talking this thing quite a bit, and I don't know if it's possible to get there before we want to go from here. But is there recommendations on, by Commissioner Hagel on these?
You know, I'm hearing these concerns, I think they need to be addressed, but I think they're relatively, the concerns about identifying the cart. You know, how do we really identify the cart within a multi-family unit? There's any number of answers that have been put on the table, and any number would work, so I think we should have our choice of solutions there, but I don't think there's any risk of not being able to figure that out. I'm still in favor of moving on this, striking any reference to the cost or fee or cart selection, so that it would just read, I hereby agree that I shall bear responsibility for the use of the garbage containers and garbage service provided to the property during the term of my lease with the landlord, and so on. In that context, I'm so happy with the situation before about this. I mean, everything we do can create unanticipated wrinkles, But I mean, that's true for anything, everything we do anyway. So it's like with the original ordinance in the first place, I feel like we're well enough served by getting it passed. I think across the board, even with the wrinkles, I think this is still better than what we've got. And it's a step forward, and things may still need to be changed if we may need to reassess, how the citations work. The concerns about a single employee having to deal with that many unmarked bags set out to the curb, that may be a concern that we need to address, and it might not. So I don't feel the need for that. Well, I guess I've said my piece. I'm happy to amend this and go ahead and move on.
Commissioner May?
I guess the question I have there is, will there need to be, if that language is stricken that discusses the monthly cost / fee, if any, to be paid for the use of the containers, will there need to be something on a form that says that the property owner is going to remain the responsible party for that, or would something need to be put on a form that says the property owner will payment through a tenant?
I think you just leave it the way it is now. The way it is now, if the tenant wants a larger can, the landlord has to arrange for it. It's not really part of this issue.
And in terms of maybe trying to be able to figure out which can goes with which unit, I mean, I know there's plastic tags available that, I don't know if a permanent marker will come off after time. Instead of putting it on the can like a sticker or something that has to be peeled off or doesn't come off, just put a plastic tag on the handle that says unit 1, 2, 3, or anything, doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be plastic or anything like that. Could possibly be a solution for that.
Mr. Moore?
I think the form, if we're going to change it to address Commissioner Wilder's comments and Mr. Bullock's comments, the form is going to have to be substantially changed. And if it's substantially changed, then you can have various options that could be selected by the people that are signing the form, the landlord and the tenant. I will say, though, that the person that's going to enforce this, of course, is the county attorney, because he's the individual that would take this to the district court. And using this form will be very difficult to enforce. And I just wonder whether it's worth going through the difficulty of enforcing this and the cost of enforcing it when a significant problem has not yet been identified. To quote Rose Clay Lindsay, who used to be a senator, it seems to me that at this point the landlords are crying before they're hurt. And if you see whether or not it's an actual problem before you create a difficult administrative task that's going to be tough to enforce, it just seems to me you might wait and see how well the program works through the first 6 months, and then see whether or not it really is a problem that needs to be addressed.
May I respond?
Sure.
It is a problem. The landlords are getting the citations, and we're trying to clean up the mess. And it's a continuing problem where you get citations. Now, most of the time, we get it cleaned up before we get the violation of the $25 that comes through. It's that original citation that's causing the problem. This will give us an enforcement tool as well as the city. Because we're going to say, if you're not compliant, you're going to get fined, and it's going to cost you money. Right now, there's not much we can do except refuse to renew a lease, which then shuttles the people to another property, and it's going to be the same problem all over again. This is a solution. Try it. If it doesn't work, you can always change it.
there's two options, to keep it like it is right now, which you all have stated that you'd like to give it a chance to work, where you haven't had much problem with it, or the one before you is Commissioner Wilder, no. So what's your pleasure?
Pass it to the lieutenant.
Pardon me? Stanley? That one, okay, we got three, we got these three, it says this, okay.
Excuse me, I couldn't hear the decision.
The clerk could not hear.
I couldn't hear what y'all said.
They're going to, Mr. Moore is going to prepare this, the one that puts it on the tenant. This puts the cost on the tenant.
Mr. Moore, will you give me a copy of the change document?
I'll do what the commission tells me to do.
Okay, would the commission be willing to let me at least look at it like I did this one?
I think if I can handle this and wrap up, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the changes we're talking about making to this draft, one would be to the title, which is currently agreement to pay for garbage service. I believe there was an agreement to not require a lease, but I could be misremembering that. I'm in favor of not requiring a lease.
Yeah, that's fine.
Remove language referring to payment, or, payment of the fee. And to replace notary public with, the landlord as a witness.
You want the telephone number?
Telephone number should be,
That's up there at the top.
Yeah, I thought actually the print name and telephone number, that's already done at the beginning. Because I realize that this is gonna, create some wrinkles for us to deal with, but. But I mean, this isn't gonna, I don't think it's gonna cause any problems we can't deal with. And if it does, we'll deal with them. In worst case scenario, we scrap it all and go back to the meeting.
You want me to stay here for the next time?
stay all night.
No, I'm talking about sitting in the hot seat. You want me in the hot seat or the cold seat?
Whatever you want.
Let me sit in the hot seat. See what it says.
All right. We're
Let's see, Mr. Bueller, would you mind coming forward? We, I think, are talking about the landlord-tenant task force, and we had Mr. Moore had worked on a resolution for this, and Mr. Bueller and I had a short communication about it, and Mr. Solicitor, do you want to take the lead on this?
Sure. Did you have they were provided with a copy of this proposed resolution drafted in their packet?
Yes.
Yeah. The proposed resolution's in the packet, and it basically indicates that the Board of Commissioners is creating a landlord-tenant task force. It'll be comprised of 11 voting members. Each commissioner would appoint one landlord member and one tenant member, and that includes the mayor as well. And then one member would be appointed from the Frankfort Housing Authority just because they represent such a large block. And then ex officio non-voting members, being city of Frankfort staff, would be attend as needed to serve in advisory or support capacity. And then the purpose and goals of the task force would be to review inspections and other steps that exist to ensure that Frankfort's residential rental property meets the requirements of the city's property maintenance code, and to recommend any improvement in these policies and procedures, and to review any unique impacts imposed by the pay-as-you-throw ordinance upon the owners of residential rental property, and to recommend any improvements to this ordinance. And of course, the task force would be selected from the voting members at the first meetings. The meetings would be open to the general public, and then I've got some dates in there for the completion of the task force work, and the final report will be submitted to the commission through the city manager. So that's a draft of the task force. I used several other task force resolutions that we passed in previous years. There's no pride of authorship, so if you don't want to tweak it, certainly understand it.
I think that rundown sounded fine to me.
The only, if I may,
Please.
the only comment I had is on the housing authority. I don't have an objection to it, but we don't enforce property maintenance code strictly on them. There is only one property that they have that they ask us to do rental inspections on, and we don't do rental inspections on any other housing authority property. And there's no charge when we do it, when we do inspections for them. Doesn't get undercover. Just thought I'd let you know that. Doesn't mean they don't have good input or good suggestions. It's plenty.
But I mean, I think that's a fair point.
And I would just assume you all would try to keep a broad representation. You don't want all just multifamily landlords. You want some that are single-family homeowners that rent their property, or maybe some that have the Peaches have a variety of gamut. They have duplexes, condos, single families, and multifamily. So you just want to make sure, I would suggest you keep that representation across as much as you can, and try to consider having at least one historic landlord. Person who owns property in the historic district is a person who rents from the property in the historic district. Older properties are looked at sometimes differently, and the building code has different requirements. So it'd just be a suggestion to try to have that representation there also. Otherwise, we would be happy to ex officio help, and Public Works would be there, I assume, for any of the pay-as-you-throw questions. But it does require someone to advertise and schedule meetings and make sure the emails get out. You might want to tag it to a specific department to spearhead it. And I'm not opposed to being that department.
I think you're the obvious. You're the obvious department. Unless anybody else wants to volunteer.
Who's not here?
Probably work, don't you think? Oh, yeah, Joseph, he knew, he's sleepy, he back there.
I think this looks good.
At the time, I have no idea the time frame. I think those are still going.
Right, but I didn't know what that time frame the commission was looking at.
Would you want us just to each email to Fred? I mean, if there's 5 of us each get one name or one tenant, we can email people we know when they decide to go to the other task force, and we can give information to you, which you could.
I'd say a month is, like, so if we pass the resolution, because this is just a resolution just to establish the task force, not to appoint the members. So we pass this here in April, then I'd be happy for us to actually appoint the task force members just at our next meeting. We can do that in our May voting meeting. And that gives about a month and a half then to get the word out for people to know that
We
this.
have already had to contact before.
Right. Oh, I know, but we don't want, I mean, that's the thing, because we definitely want to expand beyond the folks we've already had direct contact with. You know, we definitely want to make sure that that anybody who might be interested in this is aware of it and get down the line to that kind of public review. At any point when we vote to do this, it's gonna have to be during either a voting meeting or a special call meeting, legally.
So approve it end of this month, and then by the end of May, these things more.
I mean, we can scoot up the timeframe with a special call meeting, which is fine with me, but as long as we give people at least a month. Start, I mean, I'd say starting now, at least a month starting now, to get the word out. Although the city can't actually advertise publicly anything, I mean, really, the city can't send out a notice saying, hey, if you're interested in this task force, let us know until we've established it, right? Is that?
I think you could say the city intends to establish a task force if you're interested in serving.
I was gonna say, you got the newspaper over there, it's gonna be in there.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and,
That's true.
you know, they put
And then
that
they
in
should.
there. Yeah, I
So-
mean, that would be legal, wouldn't it?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
So, if we're blasting it, should people contact you all, because you all are gonna nominate 2 people? Is that right, or?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay. And then each commissioner will nominate 2 persons? Right, okay.
Commissioner Bay.
I have a huge question about this, because of the way this is constructed in terms of appointing members. We had this happen when I was mayor at one point, where we had the commission appointing names, and it just didn't come out to be a very balanced task force. And my concern is always with that. I was opposed to that at the time, just my concern, and I think it's always better to channel it through the mayor with approval of the commission, so that way, one person is sort of kind of trying to balance the representation on the task force, or unless there's other thoughts about how to balance this, because we could come up with 2 names apiece, and they all be kind of in the same demographic, which could be a problem. That did happen on, I think it was on the sewer task force that we did, and maybe another, and it's not a huge issue, that it's just a thought, unless we spell out that word. Plus, I'm not real comfortable trying to come up with 2 names to fill in this task force without consulting whatever whoever else is going to put on, because I may put 2. We could come up with the same names if we're not checking. I think is what could happen. I could put the same 2 people that Commissioner Turner was going to recommend if we don't see that list first, and then try to figure out how. Because
We just, again, forward it to Fred, and then Fred can make him.
Master list.
Yeah.
So there's just some thought that we can talk about that later, but that's just another thing to think about. Not trying to throw a wrench into it, just trying to help get the balance that everybody wants.
For what it's worth, I like the way we appointed the form-based code task force, where we agreed, before we even took names, we agreed what different segments we wanted represented. And then when we got the list of names, we all just as a group discussed and came to a consensus regarding which applicants would best represent the broadest. Because I agree, it's all about balance. Which is to say, we could just cut out the middleman and just have everybody who's interested contact Fred. And they're so welcome to contact us.
You just got dumped on you, Fred, you just got to look.
Or you heard, we could.
Any damn
How about a committee of Gary and I, with the, Gary, for your boys?
I mean, I would offer to do it, because I think that would just somehow be inappropriate. I mean, we're just talking about somebody taking names and putting them on the list and giving us the list.
Well, it looks like if you're gonna do it that way, then you're gonna have more than just the 2 that you all are gonna look at. You're gonna have probably 3 if you're gonna whittle some off of that list, and you're not going to just have them all. Does that make sense?
I think we should get I think we should get a list of everybody who's interested.
No more than 11.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
Still the same, but not more than 11.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Does that work for you?
If you have a list of
Just
people
make
you're
a big
interested
master
in.
list.
Yeah. And then you all can look at it.
May 9th?
May 9th, that's fine with me.
You want to get a task force, 3 months, 4 months, meet and issue a report, or 6 months? Or how the time frame? People usually work better with the deadline.
Yeah, I think deadlines are key.
I'd say 6 months, that would be my suggestion. That gives plenty of ample time to make a report and study.
I'm sorry, we didn't hear.
I was just making my recommendation, 6 months, to have a report back to the commission when you walk in.
In 6 months, so the
I was
time
gonna say
we
that
form it on
May.
early May.
Yeah, toward the end of the year. That'd be, are you looking at right at the end of the year?
Let's just do that.
Just to knock it out.
Yeah, unless they just really gung ho there. Yeah. Well, he can't get it done.
We have good basis.
That's fine. I mean,
Are we ready to move on? Everybody satisfied where we are now? Move to item?
Yes, we've already had the recycling report that was listed for discussion, we've already had that. And we have a discussion of the community development block grant proposals. Rebecca, you mind coming forward on this? And we have a guest, Chris Lowry. Chris, if you would mind coming forward, we appreciate you being here. For the record, we have to be able to capture comments on the microphone.
I'm still late. I'm a morning person, I've been up since 4:45.
We had some questions at previous meetings about community development block grants and some possibility of some housing. We have actually just finished a home grant in the Home Street area that started several years ago. We just actually today sent out the last check for that program. So it kind of dovetailed into this. And I just wanted Chris to come, since she worked on that and has done a lot of CDBG housing grants, and just kind of tell you all what your options are, and if you decide to go that way, what the next steps would be.
Just state your name.
Chris Lowry with Chris Lowry and Associates, and I have been working on CDBG grants, specializing in housing for over 25 years. I've been doing this for a while. There's basically, if you're interested in pursuing a grant under the housing program, there's 2 different options that you have. You have a neighborhood redevelopment type of project. That's where you typically go in and you have a whole city block or a particular street that's very dilapidated or has problems that you want to correct, and you decide to address that entire block, and it becomes a neighborhood project. Under that type of project, it's really considered a non-voluntary project. Meaning that, if you commit that you're going to bring this whole block up to code, then you're going to do that, no matter what it takes. You use eminent domain condemnation if necessary to do that. That always sounds bad because, the people say, well, we don't want to make anybody do anything. So that's one of the disadvantages of it is, but it does give you leverage. The advantage is that it does allow you to be very effective within that particular neighborhood. In other words, you can address vacant properties. One of the problems we had on home streets in some areas is some of the lots are very small. And so if you just try to build back on that lot, you can't do that. Under a neighborhood project, a lot of times you can buy all the lots and then re-lot them and bring them all up to code. You can address rental properties under that. Some of your occupants could be over income. You have to have 51% of the persons in that neighborhood be low to moderate income, but you could actually have a few kids in there who are higher income and still address their houses in that neighborhood. Since it's non-voluntary, we have to follow the Uniform Act policies under federal law. These are federal funds to acquire those properties. So you have to have your appraisals, you have to follow a very specific process in your acquisitions. The other thing that's a good thing though is that the people who are being, the homeowners especially, who are being relocated as a part of that, so you bought out their house and moved into a different lot, they receive that as a relocation payment. So there's no lien on that. It doesn't put a mortgage on them, it doesn't do anything to them. So people that, in neighborhoods I've done in some cities, they like these projects. The residents like them because they can get a new house, or they get the area cleaned up, and they don't have to pay back any money, there's no lien on it. So that's one option of a project. Like I said, it has its advantages, it has its disadvantages. Some of the people who tend to be less enthused about projects tend to be the owners of the rental property. Perhaps they're getting income off that rental property, and they don't want to lose it or have to bring it up to code, so that can be a problem. The other option, and they've been doing more of these in the recent times, is what they call just a voluntary type of project. And a voluntary project, it's just anybody within your particular, a small city might be citywide, a bigger city like Frankfort, you might pick out your target areas, and anybody within that target area can apply for the program. So this is basically going to be a homeowner rehabilitation program. So they have to already own and occupy the property when they apply. They do, 100% of the people have to be low to moderate income, and but you can't go in and address the entire structure. It's not going to be just a repair program. Under CDBG, if you fix up that house, they want the whole house fixed up. They want the whole thing cleaned up to code.
And it sounds like identical to what we did you're describing what we did in Home Street.
Very similar to what you did. That was a voluntary homeowner rehab type of program. The difference would be, that was Kentucky Housing Funds, and that was the home program, which are also federal funds. The rules are a little bit different. They're similar, but they have some differences to them. Actually, CDBG can be more flexible in some aspects. The difference would be that their CDBG is that they want to be ready to go with the money. So when you get something funded, you've really got to have your project, you've got to have all your ducks in a row, you've got to know everything that's going on. So under the CDBG program, I get late, I can't talk, program, you actually have to pre-qualify your applicants and rank them prior to ever submitting your application. You have to already be through your clearinghouse process, you already have to determine whether or not these properties are historic or not, whether or not they're going to be demolition or rehab. You have to get clearance from Heritage Council if they are historic, whether or not, they're going to approve your plans, or you have to work out a mitigation plan. All that has to be done before you submit the application. One of the disadvantages is that they're trying to get their projects moving faster, so they've been moving back the deadline. So now the deadline for the application is the day after Labor Day. So that's really not a lot of time to get all that done. So if you're going to do a project, whichever project you're going to go for, you need to start on it now. Somebody said, well, there's a long agenda coming in May. I said, well, that's 30 days off the time you would have to do this kind of project. And that's what we would do is if you decided to go with a target area or a homeowner rehab voluntary type of program, is you would need to advertise for your applicants, get out preliminary applications, try to, if it's in a targeted area, you may even want to mail them out to that area just to make sure people are aware of it. A lot of times we hear, well, I didn't hear about this Home Street project until after the fact, that kind of thing. But once you get into preliminary applications, you would actually have to go in and look at each house, what the problems were with it, document it, figure out whether it's historic or not, issues like whether or not it's floodplain, those type of environmental issues. And then actually do a third-party income verification of the owners. And in some cases, we may even want to, do a little bit looking at like whether or not they have taxes owed to the city or other problems that could be a problem. I do have a ranking system that I use that has points for their income. The lower their income, the more points they get. Elderly and disabled people get extra points. And then most of my points are based on actually the condition of the house, looking at different factors. Like the age of the house. If it's a pre-1978 house, they get a point because of lead paint issues and other issues. Whether the house is insulated, condition of the windows. It's a variety of factors. Now, I won't go through all that now, but that's just the general ideas that we would if you decide to do this, you would go ahead and advertise a notice of project and try to get the word out there and begin these preliminary applications. So you wouldn't really decide tonight that you're submitting an application, because the first thing you want to do is just see if you have applicants. See if you've got a project there. You could do it, we talked about, we looked at Bell Point neighborhood that the mayor was interested in. We're a little bit concerned about there because some of the worst properties are kind of down in the floodplain area, and some of those are vacant, and that might be more suitable for a neighborhood type of project. And they did one some years back that was closed out in 2002 in Bell Point, and they just bought out some of the properties that were flood prone and cleared those off and they put a park down there. So that was a neighborhood redevelopment project.
With FEMA,
Pardon?
I thought FEMA paid for that.
There was CDBG funds.
There was home money in there.
There may have been a combination, there was probably a combination of all three funds in that project, but it was a CDBG grant that they had. But I think they did home funds for some of them, and relocating some of the renters to other properties, that type of thing. So it was a combination of funding. If you do it right now, unless they change things with the home program under a voluntary homeowner rehab program, many times in most of my projects, once we get the CDBG fund, they have a gap financing program through Protected Housing Corporation. So we've been able to actually bring some of their funds in to address the different additional houses. When your CDBG grant may be enough to do 10 houses, if we bring in this home gap financing program, we might be able to do 12 or 14. One city I just finished, we committed to doing 10, we actually did 14, but we were able to bring in the home gap financing funds. And that's just, the gap financing is just that, it's gap financing. In other words, you can't just go get that money to do a project, but if you got money to do a project and you want to bring in some of their funds, they'll allow you to do 6 houses per fiscal year, their funds. 6 houses per fiscal year, typically $40,000 per house. And you can only have 2 under construction at a time. So it's kind of targeted for smaller projects like habitats or just doing a few at a time. But like I said, if you do get the CDBG grant, a lot of times you can bring that money in just to extend the number of houses. Also, you can assist. That's a real fast summary of something.
And just make sure we all up to par on this. At the last meeting, I had made a comment that I would like to be able to look at some of these block grants and I mentioned, as you stated, Bell Point. And Home Street's going on, they've been doing similar things. And so that's why I guess Rebecca.
Yeah, we might look at that.
I don't know how the commission feels about this. I just know that I have, in my mind, I think it'd be something good if we could do for the neighborhood. But now in terms of funds, how much money are we talking about? And you think on these block grants, up to what?
$1 million.
Up to $1 million.
For housing, you can get $1 million grant.
Okay. Now you mentioned voluntary and involuntary.
Right.
Now, on the voluntary, Commissioner Water asked you that the Home Street, you said that's the Home Street. Could this be a joint project? If the commission would move this direction, if there may be some more at Home Street, I'm just, no.
Yeah, I would think that, I wouldn't just limit it to Bell Point from looking at those houses up there. I mean, you have some of the houses that might be low income, but so there's some pretty nice houses up there too. So you kind of got a mix there.
Yeah.
So I'm afraid if you just limited it to Bell Point, you might not have a big enough applicant base of eligible persons, once you sort through it. But if you threw in Home Street and Bell Point and had both those target areas, hopefully that would be without going citywide and having, that sometimes we do try to do projects like out in the county. If you do one in Placer County, you get 75 applications, and that's almost a bad thing because now you can only help 10 of those, so you've got 65 people mad at you. So you want to kind of have a big enough base that you get in good applicants, but not so broad that it's that it's really hard to target. It's in effect that it's spread out and it's not going to be as good an applicant.
How much of a commitment financially would this be for the city?
There's no set, unlike some of the CDBG categories like community projects and public facilities, they don't require a specific match from the city. There's not like a set percentage match on a housing project, but I think they would look for the city to put in something meaningful because, that if a city project and you all want to do it, they feel like you all should be putting in something according to your means. You know, some of that could be in-kind services like, I think we waive building permit fees, that kind of, you know, that kind of thing. There might be some cash commitment. One reason they don't require like a set number is because normally you don't put city funds like into the actual rehab of the house. Sometimes you can use city funds for paying for things like the attorney fees for like title searches or property surveys or demolition, you know, kind of the soft services or support stuff to that. Like I said, there's not really a set dollar amount, but, you know, if you went in and said, you know, we want this project funded, but the city of Frankfort's not willing to put any money into it, then that's probably not going to be a good application.
How much would the Home Street project, how much was that?
How was that? 40,000?
I was gonna say 37, but 37,
Yeah,
40,000.
it's in that neighborhood, about 40,000, you know.
How many did the city put in?
Yes.
And how much was the total project?
792,000.
Uh-huh.
10 houses.
I just think I don't, you know, long hours here and now, but I would just like to get it, we heard this, and, you know, of course, we got on here discussions of why. And, I just would like to get a feel from the commission. I don't want to beat a dead horse. I mean, I don't know how y'all feel about this. I feel strongly that if we could do something for those two neighborhoods, I would love to do it. And, I'm interested in why too. We talked with that. I've written letters, you know, about getting information about the why. It seemed like it'd be dubious. I mean, to me, the response I got, it would be difficult to pursue. But anyway, how do you feel, Mr. Turner?
I agree to an extent with the mayor in that we need to do something for those neighborhoods, those older neighborhoods that we have here in the city. But at this point, I'm willing to support the process of the old law in terms of the research for this grant. So,
Did you say you do? What'd you say about that?
I said I do support their attempt to go after this grant and want to help them in any way as possible. But I do agree that if we have opportunities to help Bell Point or Home Street or other areas in the community that really need it, that's something we should try to do, but not at the expense of other identified projects that we already have.
Like why? You would put the why before this.
Well, considering we don't have an identified project yet for these other neighborhoods, and we do have an identified project for the Y, I'm putting an identified project that we've thought out and there's a plan there versus something of, we want to help a neighborhood, but we just don't know what we're going to do yet. And that's where we're at with Bell Point.
No, not necessarily. Within a timeline here of September, a proposal, if we're going to put any at all, a proposal would have to be in by September. Sure. We have information about the why, which I will just, I've given you all a copy of the letters, correspondence that I have written requesting